Hi, so the fourth test match at Old Trafford has finally come to an end, and what a memorable test match it has turned out to be for India, Indian team, and Indian fans. There will be absolute celebration, and rightfully so, because this young team, under a very young and debutant captain in this series, has managed what many of the elite teams could not have managed to do so under a given circumstances. Because on the fourth day, with 15 minutes to go for the first session to end, England were finally all out and they had amassed 669 runs, their highest at Old Trafford, to end up with 311 runs lead over India at the end of first innings. That meant India, which was completely exhausted and tired after fielding for 156 overs, had to now do only one thing: try to bat out more than 5 sessions to manage somehow a draw, and that would be the best possible result they could hope for from this test match. Because the most likely and logical result that would be expected was a defeat, because surpassing 311 runs to make England bat again was such a very monumental task on a pitch which was showing signs of uneven bounce. And in the last 2 days to bat out for this young team, especially after a demoralizing innings at Lords where they got dismissed for just 170, was seeming to be a daunting task. And when in the very first over they became 0 for 2, when Jaiswal and Sai Sudarshan got dismissed in successive deliveries, that meant defeat was glaring at them, and most people felt that maybe fourth day would be the last day of this test match and India would end up losing by an innings, and therefore would lose the series there itself in the fourth test, with fifth test having no bearing in terms of the series. But then came the captain Submal Gill and Rahul, and they knew that effectively India were not 0 for 2 but 0 for 3, because Rishabh Pant, their mainstay batter in the middle order, was almost ruled out of the test match because of the fracture, and there was no chance that he would come into bat if the innings would be tottering at say 200 for 8 and with still 111 runs to go. They would not take that kind of a chance. So that means effectively Subman and Rahul knew that they had to do all the hard work to save this test, which looked next to impossible at a score of 0 for 3 effectively. But from that moment onwards, they started applying themselves, giving their all to bat out minute after minute, hour after hour, and session after session. They not only managed to play out both the sessions yesterday, they also added 174 runs yesterday to give some hope to the team and to their fans that maybe a miracle would be possible. And when they resumed in the fifth day, they ensured they managed to negate everything that was thrown at them and managed to go on slowly and steadily building an innings at a very slow pace, because they knew under overcast conditions survival was at stake. And Stokes managed to come back fresh and managed to come and bowl, because yesterday he was not able to bowl because of his injury, but today he smelled blood, so he came and started bowling, and then all of a sudden the pitch looked very spicy and helpful for the bowlers, and batting seemed very tough, which was not the case yesterday. And ultimately Stokes managed to take out the wicket of Rahul at 90, but after Rahul has played a brilliant innings. And then by that time they had already arrived close to 190 runs in the first in their third wicket partnership, and had given hope. And then Subman was joined by Washington Sundar, and then again they started building that innings, and they had reached 222 when Subman Gill got out after just reaching his 100 to Jofra Archer, and then it became 222 for 4. And the very next ball, new player Jadeja gave a catch to Root, who dropped that catch. It was a tough one, but he should have held on to that catch. Root, being such a fabulous slip catcher, should have held on to, and then the story could have been very different. But they dropped that catch, and with that they dropped the test match, because from then onwards Jadeja and Washington Sundar played with remarkable application and concentration and exemplary grit and resilience to shut out the game completely. They almost batted for 2 complete sessions and added 203 runs without getting separated to take the score to 425, when Jadeja had already scored a century, and finally when Washington Sundar achieved his century, his maiden century, then the game was called up, because there was no way England could have any hope of winning the test match. But in the process, Jadeja and Washington Sundar ensured that England had toiled enough in the fifth day, and they had already bowled nearly 143 overs in the second innings. And if you add the 114 overs in the first innings, that means India has managed to make England toil for 257 overs in this test match. And with the next test barely 3 days away, that had been also a big impact on English bowling attack now, because it now would be very tired, very exhausted, because they have also gone through 4 tests with the core of their bowling attack unchanged. So now they may be forced to do some changes. Nobody knows about Stokes' physical fitness after that injury, whether he would be able to bowl. So he has just bowled 11 overs, and when he realized that there is nothing in the pitch and he was not going to risk his injury, so he just stopped. So nobody knows whether he can bowl in the fifth test, and he has been clearly their best bowler throughout the series. So without him, their bowling strength would be depleted severely. Nobody knows whether Jofra Archer, who has made a comeback in this series after 4 years of absence due to injuries, whether he would be able to come and play in the third consecutive test, that is the fifth test, that would be his third consecutive test, and that too after just 3 days gap, after bowling almost 23 overs in the second innings. Nobody knows about Work's fitness. He has anyway been looking toothless and little exhausted after that initial burst in the first session in the fourth day, and Braden Carse has been very ordinary in this test match, especially after the 40th over and while bowling to the left-handers. So they have now some worries, even though they are still 2-1 up, even though they had the psychological advantage for most part of the fourth test, and they should have fancied to themselves to win this test match and win the series. But the fact that they have not been able to do, and in the process have been really stressed by this Indian team, would have actually had a scar on their psychological self, and they would be feeling a little disappointed and frustrated. So their bowlers, their fielding side would be really exhausted, but the batting would be very high on their confidence, because Stokes has scored a century after 2 years, Root has been looking fabulous, and so has been Pope and Crawley and Duckett. So all these people would be looking fantastic. On the other hand, Indian bowling has been pretty ordinary, but that has got to do with a lot to do with the team selection. I'm sure the team management would now be at least smart enough and would be little rational enough to look at their own mistakes and do a few changes for the fifth test. But the batting has been superb. Jadeja has been one of the best batters in the series. He has become the second batter after Lakshman to have scored 400 runs at number 6 or below in this series, in this test series. And so has been Shubman Gill now with tons and tons of runs. KL Rahul has been the wall for this Indian batting lineup, and India has been also served pretty well by some very useful contribution, including a century by Washington Sundar whenever he has been pushed to deliver. So Indian batting looks very solid and assured. Of course, Rishabh Pant's absence would be felt, and if Bumrah is to be rested, that would be a huge blow. Now Indian bowling needs to come to the party. There has to be some very sensible choices. Other than that, there are not many problems for Indian batting, and if India can manage to stitch up a good bowling attack for this fifth test, then anything is possible, because the series is still open and India has managed to do that by the resilient batting in the fourth test. So now anything is possible, though on paper England looks the better team and India looks very weak on the bowling, but they can still do it. They had done it in the past in 2021 in the Border Gavaskar Trophy. They can still do it, because they just need one final push in the fifth test and one great effort. If they can manage that with the newfound motivation and team spirit and confidence from the fourth test, then they can give a killer blow and they can at least end up this series on even terms, and they won't have the disappointment of losing a test series. And if a young inexperienced team with a new captain can manage that, that would be as good as a win for India. So everything to look forward to for the fifth test, and we can again expect a cracker of a fifth test. Hope both the teams have come back fresh and fit, and they don't have any injury troubles other than the known ones, and they come up and show a great performance in the fifth test one final time. Looking forward to the fifth test. Thank you.